Now, I want to apologize ahead of time. Afterwards, it's not that I don't like to be social. I'm not antisocial. It's just that my plane leaves at 2:15. So if I finish at 12, Kent and I are going to have to run hard to get to the airport. And I will be back in South Texas in about 85 to 90 degree weather. Oh, I wish I could take this cool weather with me. Someone said, praise God, and I'm saying, no. That hot place is a place I'm trying to avoid. I want to, I want to go to heaven. Oh, but it's so good to be here. And you don't know, young people and young adults, as our president said, you don't know how it feeds my to be here with you and to rub shoulders with you. You guys light my fire in a way nothing else does. And I have thoroughly enjoyed my time here this semester, and look forward to coming back again next semester. Now, I've had a bunch of people talk to me and ask me if I was going to share my struggles with dyslexia growing up in chapel this morning, and I'm not. Okay, I did on Monday in the high school chapel, and probably the next time I come back and speak in chapel, I plan to use that unless the Lord changes my mind. All right. But this morning I want to talk to you about faith. All right. Where are we going to go to look at faith? What chapter in the Bible? Exactly, Hebrews 11. All right, so you can turn there. You know, there is so much that we say about faith nowadays, and quite frankly, it has nothing to do with faith. We treat faith like a bubblegum machine. We put our quarter in and crank the knob and hope that our favorite red comes out or our favorite blue comes out. Or maybe like the lottery, we go and buy a ticket and keep our fingers crossed while we scratch it off and hope that we're the winning number. And somehow, if that happens, suddenly there's this sudden gush of blessing and outpouring of God that overwhelms us, and it's a testimony to our faith. And that's stupidity, all right? It just is. It absolutely has nothing to do with faith. That's not what faith is all about. When I was your age, or a little younger, a little earlier than college, well, right at the end of high school, the first of college, I remember that I saw this girl that was just beautiful, and I thought that probably she and I would make a team. And I began to pray to that end, and I had faith. I mean, I really had faith. So much so that I talked myself into it. And I was convinced that was what it was supposed to be. And so I asked her. And she was a lady of little faith. She told me no. And my faith was shattered for about 20 minutes. And then I realized God had saved me from disaster. And so I went on looking for some other object in which to focus my faith. Don't laugh too hard. Y'all have been there as well. We really exercise that faith when it's focused on something we want. And we pray hard, and Lord, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. And if we quote all those verses, you know, faith like the seed of a mustard can move this mountain. But so many times, faith, as we call it in that situation, is nothing more than a lever to try to maneuver God into doing what we want. A number of years ago, one of the top country western songs for the year was a song called Thank God for Unanswered Prayers. I have some prayers that I prayed in faith, believing, at least in my mind, that I am so grateful God didn't answer. I really am. And if you're honest, you probably have some of those as well. So what is this thing we call faith? Well, faith is a living organism. It is something that is alive. something that is active, something that moves in us and fills us and reaches beyond us and latches on to God himself. It is a powerful force that changes worlds. But we have to learn this walk of faith. All right? And so as we look here in Hebrews, there are so many areas we could go. Those of you that like taking notes, I can give you some little outlines of faith, all right? We see a definition of faith in verse 1. We see a declaration concerning faith in going back up to chapter 10, verse 38 and 39, down in chapter 11, verse 6. We see descriptions of personal faith in chapter 11, verses 7 through 22. I love the book of Hebrews, and my Bible is all marked up, and I was looking this morning, and in verse 3 we have a work of faith, and 4 a walk of faith, and 6 a warning of faith, and 7 a waiting of faith, and 10 the wonder of faith, and 16 the willingness of faith, and 20 the worship of faith, and 28, I can't read my own writing, the wisdom of faith. It just goes on. The 28, the way of faith. 29, the winning of faith. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And so when you begin to study this idea of faith, the possibilities are limitless. And that's what God gives us and wants to shape and mold and strengthen in us to help establish us in the faith, which is a different definition of the word faith, all right, and help us to walk a walk of faith, and we want to look at this together. Now, this walk that we call the walk of faith is like you're walking on the, all I can think of, ladies, is cumbre, the peak of the mountain. All right, and on this side is a great ditch, and on this side is a great ditch. And our world's in a mess, and there are so many voices hollering out and trying to grab our attention and to try to pull us this way or that way. And in the middle of all this, we have to have enough faith that holds us steady. On one side, you have liberalism and modernism and humanism and all of these things that focus on me and myself. And we don't want to go that way. On the other side, we have legalism, and the extreme of that side would even be occults or cultish type of things, and we don't want to go that way. So we're trying to keep our balance on this narrow road on top of the mountain without going on either side. And the tendency is, when I look over here and see this, oh, I don't want to go there, so I swing this way. And then I look, oh, I don't want to go there, so I swing this way. And so we're bouncing from one side to the other. But a faith, in a genuine faith in God, is what holds us steady and helps us to navigate this way, because we're not looking there and we're not looking there, we're looking there. And if I look there, I don't have to worry about going into the ditch on this side or into the ditch on this side, because my faith in God holds my feet steady on the way. Let me tell you something, young people. I'm sorry, you're young people. I'm pushing 60, okay? So you're young people. The devil doesn't care if he drives you in this ditch or in this ditch, because either ditch, you're off the way. And you're stationary. You're not moving. You're not effective. You're not going to be used by God to full potential because you're in the ditch. And if he can't get you on this side, he'll push you in that side. And most of the time, the extremes are governed by fear. We're afraid to be labeled as legalistic, or we're afraid to be labeled as liberal, and so we're just bouncing all over the place. Forget that. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Dig into this word until you, as Brother Rodney said, drill down until you hit solid rock and stand on that. And then focus on God and allow Him to help you to strengthen your faith. Allow Him to help you to walk a consistent daily walk of faith. It's as simple as putting one foot in front of another and keeping your eyes on where you're going, and you'll avoid those pitfalls. Okay? So let's look at faith. And once again, there's so many areas I could go, but time is not our friend, they say. So, all right, let's look first of all at the foundation of faith. All right, the foundation of faith. I want to read for your hearing today verses 23 through 28. It's the story of Moses. All right, Hebrews 11:23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Now, the reason for their lack of fear was their strong faith. All right? They had faith in the God they served, and so they didn't fear the command of the king. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. And once again, in verse 27, we see that it was his faith that overcame his fear. All right? You don't have to live in fear of doing something wrong, or of slipping off the way, or blowing it and dropping the ball and disappointing God and disappointing yourself and disappointing everyone else. Let me just say, if you reach that point, you have one of two options. You can lay there groveling on your face in the dirt and feeling sorry for yourself and rationalizing why it all went wrong and quit. Or you have one other option. You can get up, dust off, and keep going. It's just that simple. And that's not oversimplifying it. You either quit or you go on. And I'm not going to quit. I'm going to go on. But I don't have to live in fear. Oh, what happens if, unbeknownst to me, I do something that doesn't please God, and then he just cuts me off? God loved you enough to leave heaven to come here and die to save you. He's not looking for a reason to throw you out. He could have done that a long time ago. He is looking for ways to include you, to bring you in, to establish your feet, to fill you with faith, encourage your heart, keep your eyes and mind focused on Christ. Everything about the power of God is channeled in your direction to lift you and help you on your way. And that's the God that we put our faith in. It's not some nebulous something that just flies by and then, oh, that didn't work, so here's another one and we catch on. No. We're anchored into the God of the universe, and my faith holds in him today. All right, so let's look at the foundations of faith. In Moses' life and in my life and probably in your life, the initial foundations of faith were laid by someone else. In this case, it was his parents. It was their faith that ignored the decree of the king. It was their faith that made them hide him for 6 months. It was their faith that looked beyond an ugly, red-faced, screaming, squalling baby and saw that he was a goodly child. I just can't believe that Moses was handsome when he was born. I've been there. I've seen kids. My son was ugly. Now, he spent a lot of time with me, and I rubbed off on him, and he's pretty good looking today. Sorry. No, it was the faith of the parents They established this groundwork, this foundation. I can go around and talk to you about people that I know that are some of your leaders, that I know how they were raised. Sister Vernon, good grief. Sonia Vernon, Sister Vernon's your mother. I know how your parents lived. And I know that you're building on that beginning foundation. It was that way with my mother and father. They walked a walk of faith. My mom had the most beautiful, simplistic faith. She was a heathen, and God found her. She wasn't looking for God. God went looking for her. And there began a relationship that was as open and as transparent as any you will ever see. I used to hide on the steps just outside her bedroom door because I liked to listen to her pray. She talked to God like she talked to me. It was like God was right there, her greatest friend. And you know what she did? She laid a foundation of faith that I'm building on. I saw it work. I experienced it in my life. I remember one time we had gone to North Carolina to see my mother's family. I believe maybe it was a funeral that we had gone to. We had an old 57 Rambler station wagon. We lived right here where the guard shack is, all right? Where that ramp goes up in, there was a little parking lot there, but there was a big hump up over the sidewalk, and then it sort of went down toward the Tiffany house. And then there was a great old big building, almost a duplicate of the music hall right there, and that's where we lived. We lived in the upstairs, and other people lived downstairs, but that's where we lived. And we had this old 57 Rambler station wagon, and we had gone to North Carolina, and that vehicle had about 130 or 40,000 miles, but it was all we had. And we were coming home, and we were coming through the mountains on Old 52, somewhere close to Bluefield, West Virginia, headed back this way. And suddenly, that car sputtered and died. Now, it so happened that where we died on old Route 52, just across the road, there was a driveway, and that guy was a mechanic. And so my dad got out. We sat in the car. My dad went and talked to him. He came out. We pushed that vehicle in the drive, and he looked at it, and he did some tests on it, and he came back, and he shook his head. He said, "Sir, I'm sorry to tell you, this car is worn out. It will never run again." Well, that's not what you want to hear, especially when if my parents had $2 or $3 in the bank, it would have been a miracle, all right? At that time, there was only 5 of us kids, and I think we were all there. And so Daddy came back, and he sat in the car, and he and Mom talked a little bit, and then he turned around, and he talked to us, we children that were in the car, and he said, "Well, the mechanic said that that this car will never run again, and we're a long ways from home, and I've got to get back to teach." And so I remember saying, "Daddy, what are we going to do?" He said, "We're going to lay our hands on this car and pray for it, that God will touch it and help us to get back to Cincinnati." So we did. We prayed for that car. And when we got done, Daddy said, "Okay, get in." We all got in, and he got behind the wheel, and just like it's what the normal thing was, he just reached up and hit the key, and that car started, and we drove all the way back to Cincinnati. And as we came and started up over the sidewalk here in the little entrada, in the little entrance, it died. And we had to push it up into the parking space, and it never ran again. But it brought us back from Bluefield, West Virginia to here on faith. Now, that's not some nebulous something. That happened. I was there. So how did that impact my life? It was a little over a year ago, maybe closer to 2 years ago now. I was down in southern Mexico. I was going from the city of Oaxaca on down to San Gabriel, where Brendan and Yvonne live. And I was loaded down. Our national president was with me, and we were coming through the mountains, and we have to go completely over top of this one huge mountain. And the roads are just so curvy, and there's no guardrails and bad drop-offs, and sometimes the road washes out, and it's just bad, and there's no place to stop, there's no place to pass. It's just one long pull. And a big crane had started down that road ahead of us, and right in the strongest part of that pull, he was there, and he was going about 3 or 4 miles an hour. And there was probably 20 cars. I was one of them, and I had it in drive, but my speedometer was just bouncing on 0. I mean, you could have walked as fast as I was driving. And we did that for an hour and a half. Well, I had a 1999 Mercury Mountaineer, and it had 269,000 miles on it. And that's hard on an old car. And as I began to watch, the heat gauge began to rise, and it began to rise, and it began to rise, and there's no place to pull off, and there's no place to stop. And I'm saying, Lord, please touch this car. Help us to get someplace. We finally got to the top, and it was clear up in the red, and I was seeing smoke come out. And as we got to the top, the road sort of turned off and went down on the other side, on the decline on the other side, and right there was a little tienda. It was just a little house with it looked like a little place to keep animals, but they actually had a little store there. What they had that I needed was room to pull off, and they had a big barrel of water. And so I pulled off into there, and I got out and opened my hood, and when I opened my hood, it just burst into flames. I mean, all across, there were just flames rolling out of that. And you could see bits of plastic stuff dripping down on the ground, and we grabbed buckets, and we just doused the fire. And the people came, ¿Qué pasó? What happened and all this? And we're looking at it, and I'm saying, oh, my goodness, I am way far away from everywhere. It would take me probably, if they had to tow my vehicle, it would take hours to get to the closest garage. There was no one there to work on it. And I began to pray. Well, we got it all cooled down. We put water in the radiator and all this, and then our national president looked at me and he said, so what are we going to do now? We got another hour and a half to go that way. We have 4 hours to go back this way. And I said, we're going to pray for this vehicle. So he got on one side and knelt down, and I got on the other side and knelt down, and we laid our hands on the old green Mercury Mountaineer, and we prayed and asked God to touch it and help us to get where we were going. We got up. They had 2 or 3 big, like a 4 or 5 liter jugs of water. I bought all they had, and I got up, and Santiago looked at me and he said, so what do we do now? I said, we get in and go to San Gabriel. And just like my dad, I grabbed that key and stuck it in there. I'm not sure my faith was as firm as his was, but I was going on faith, and I hit that switch, and that car started, and we made it on to San Gabriel and did a few little adjustments. We would stop every little pull-off place and pour water on it and cool it down and fill it up and got on, and then we did a little work, and I got back to Oaxaca City, and I replaced the little radiator on the transmission and went on back to South Texas and drove another 10,000, 12,000 miles on that and sold it. And I saw the car just day before I left to come up here. I sold it to a Mexican man that's still driving it. But the foundation of my faith was laid by my father. And he had taught me that when all else is impossible, we simply turn to the God we serve and say, Lord, if it would please you, you can touch this car and help us to go about your business. And he did that. The foundation. Moses' parents were people of faith. And let's look how it affected him. Go to the next verse. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, all right, he didn't have a hand in any of it. when his parents were making a decision. But now it's his turn, and he was come to years, and he had to make some decisions, and he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's servant. And he was going back to the faith of his parents that had been instilled in him, and he believed in a God that was bigger than Pharaoh. All right? So we see the foundations of faith. We also see the functions of faith, and that would be verses 24 to 27. First of all, we see that faith sometimes says no. Verse 24. When Moses was come to years, what did he say? No, I refuse to be Pharaoh's servant, because there's a better way than living in a palace of a heathen king. I'm not going to do it. And the reason was the established faith in his heart that there was a better way. So here is the active voice of faith that says, no, I'm not going to do it. We also see that faith makes a choice. Verse 25, choosing rather to suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So we see that Moses made a choice. Now, the wording here is very clear that it wasn't just sort of a reflexive type of thing. No, he looked at God's people, and he realized that they were suffering affliction. And he looked at what life would be in the palace of Pharaoh, and he realized that there were pleasures there. But we come back to that act of faith. When he had compared the two, he made his choice, and he chose rather to suffer affliction than to enjoy the pleasures of Pharaoh's palace. Once again, young people, it's that faith that is solid and firm and active in our hearts. You don't have to go astray. It's not a blind thing, well, I just shut my eyes and hope I end up there. No, that is totally contrary to Scripture. I'm talking about a living, breathing, active faith that flows through our life, that touches every decision we make. And we make all of those decisions in light of the faith of God and the faith that we have in God. Faith makes a choice. The third thing we see is faith's value system. Verse 26, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than all the treasures of Egypt. Is this guy nuts? No, he's a man of faith. What we have here is like a huge balance system. And he is obviously considering it. The wording is active tense. I mean, he is considering it. He's thinking about it. So he has this balance system, and on this is pleasing God. And on this side is pleasing man. And he puts them on the two. And every time the scale tipped in God's direction. He made the comparison. He did the study. He ran the numbers. And when he got to the end of it, that faith that reached down into the recesses of his soul and reached up into the presence of God, that pull was stronger than the pull of all the riches of Egypt. Esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. You see, faith has a value system. It goes on and says, because he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Now, I'm not sure what that says in other translations. It's probably a whole lot clearer than the respect of the recompense of the reward. All right? Basically, to put it in Steve Stetler grammar, at the end of the day, the smile of God was more important than all the possessions you could have. Faith's value system. Young people, you don't have to go astray. You don't have to be led aside to the pleasures of this world. And there's anything you want out there. The problem is, with my faith laying a hold of God and hanging on into the very presence of God himself, I don't want those pleasures of this world. And I would rather suffer. I would rather be ignored. I would rather be mocked. I would rather have to live by faith rather than by sight, because I know that at the end of the way, Everything will be worth it all. Faith. Faith. I like what he says. The comparison is the riches of grace on one side and everything else on the other side. Is your faith, young person, such that you can understand the riches of grace? The riches of the blessing of God, the fulfillment that comes in walking with him. The riches of grace versus everything else. Then we have faith's sight. So faith says no, faith makes a choice, faith's value system, and faith's sight. Verse 27, it says, as seeing him who is invisible. You know what faith does? Faith helps you to see realities that other people don't see. Faith helps you to have a perspective that is not clouded by this world. He saw something that no one else saw. Faith sees things. You don't believe me? You read through the rest of this chapter, and it talks about those that are sawn asunder and all this kind of stuff. It said, not having received the reward of their faith, but they had seen it afar off. It was the sight of their faith that helped them to endure the persecution that took their lives and ushered them into the presence of God and the reward of their faith. Faith sight. Young people, what do you see when you look at the world? Do you see glitter and glamour? Lord, help your faith. That's only surface, and below it is heartache and destruction. You look at what's going on in our media world and all this kind of stuff. Those people that gave themselves to the glitter and the glamour, and now they're facing the hard, harsh reality of paying for the things that you did wrong. And suddenly all of their goals and ambitions and all of this are crushed because their faith saw something completely different. But when we look, we see this, but then above it is all of the riches of grace, all of the blessings of heaven, all of the kingdom of God, the very Son of God that loved me enough to come down and walk here on this earth to show me how to live. That's what my faith sees. That's where my faith is anchored. And there's not anything in this world that can shake that faith. Faith sight. There's so many things that I can't cover them all, especially if I'm going to be done by 12. All right. Then we see the fulfillment of faith, verses 32 through 40. And this is the story of what happened to all of, and it says they don't even have time to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel, and it just goes down through all of these. And then it talks about those who through faith subdued kingdoms and wrought righteousness and obtained promises and stopped the mouths of lions and quenched the violence of fire and escaped the edge of the sword, and out of weakness were made strong and waxed valiant in fight and turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Boy, that's a powerful active force. I mean, you look at that. When's the last time you stopped the mouth of a lion? That's what happened here through faith. Now, we're talking about something that is big and powerful, and the fulfillment of faith is that when we latch on in faith to God, He will bring us through and meet our needs and satisfy the longings of our heart. But it goes back to what the president said on Chapel on Wednesday. It is that faith that lets us turn loose and say, Lord, you choose what is best for me. And I will walk in the way you choose. And I will follow the path that you lead. And I will be faithful to be your child in every situation. And folks, there is not anything in this world that can stand in front of that powerful, dominant, overpowering faith. And that's what made these guys. They were flesh and bone just like you are. There was nothing spectacular about them. In fact, in places in the Bible it says he was flesh just like we were, yet he overcame. And young people, you can overcome any test, any temptation, any problem that comes your way by faith. Faith that holds on to God. The fulfillment of faith. It says in verse 39, they obtained a good report through faith. That means, once again in Stetler terminology, that means God looked down and he said, yeah, that's my boy. That's my girl. I'm proud of them. They're being faithful. I claim them as my own. They received a good report. And folks, that only comes through faith. As we walk this walk of faith and we focus on the object of our faith and keep our eyes off of the extremities on both sides, we can walk a victorious Christian life, and God can help us to get to the end of the way and hear those words reverberating, well done, thou good and faithful servant. They received a good report by faith. And then we see the focus of faith. That's the last one, and that skips over into chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Wherefore, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, those are the ones that died in the faith. Folks, you're not alone. There's a host of people that went before you and helped to lay that foundation. I have a feeling that when I'm in my darkest hour, I have a mom and dad that are leaning over heaven saying, come on, Steve, hang on, you got this. God will pull you through. Some of those people that were my heroes that I sat under, L.D. Wilcox and J. Wesley Adcock, R.G. Flexen, people like that. And they're looking down at these that they had poured out their life working here in this institution. And you may not know them by name, but I have a feeling they're looking down and saying, come on, son, don't give up. Hang on. It's worth it. We're pulling for you. Here, we're trying to hold this end of the line. You just hang on. We'll pull you through. And we know that God is saying, come on, child. My blood, my grace is sufficient for you. There's not anything that can overwhelm you. You hold steady. I'm right here beside you. When you can't, I can. When you're at the end of your hoarded resources, my full giving is only begun. And if I need to, I'll just lift you and carry you. But we got to keep going. We got to keep going. We're compassed about by a great cloud of witnesses. Let us lay aside the weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us. What? Looking unto Jesus. And there's the key. That's the key to faith. If you look any other direction, in any person, a person will let you down. Don't follow me. I try the best I can to be an example that you can follow. But you need to get your eyes above me because I'm human. The staff and faculty are godly staff and faculty. I have confidence in them, and I lock arms with them. But you got to get even above that. We look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of what? Of our faith. Of our faith. Of our faith. Of our faith. We can make it. We can do this with God's help. And it's all because of that something that's called faith. And it started as a little tree. But today it feels like it's a huge oak raising up out of my heart and reaching its branches into the sky and hanging on to God in heaven. the author and finisher of our faith. Faith says no. Faith makes the decision. Faith is rewarded at the end of the way. Let's stand. Father, we thank you today that you're the